Well, hello everyone, and today we begin our subject matter of Baroque in earnest. And as we have seen, the 16th century, beginning after 1520, essentially Raphael's death, by that time the artists, the sculptors, there were no secrets for them anymore. They could do just about anything. And so as a result, they fell on this method of manierism, the method of maniera, because so much had been done before they began to paint that they felt no need really any longer to look at nature. They could very easily just look at what's already been done and see how they can change that, how they can make it more personal, more in their own style. But as a result, the style began to be sort of more artificial, more affected. Well, that's what mannered is. The style became mannered. So as a result, by the end of the 16th century, with the exception of Venice, in Venice there was Titian was living there, and there was a very robust, extraordinary style in Venice. But in the rest of Italy, there was no really creative impulse at that point. So it was felt that something was clearly lacking. And it was then that this new style of ours will begin to show itself. Today it is called Baroque. It's an odd word, Baroque. It's Portuguese. It means something like irregular. And from what I gather, originally when the word appeared, it was almost pejorative, something odd, something unduly done, something irregular. But then, with time, as with so many terms, something that seemed inappropriate at the time became something that we associate with a certain phenomenon, and we associate Baroque with a certain phenomenon. So it was felt with manierism that there was not enough feeling, that there was not enough space, that things were just way too contrived. And so here we have a painter who lived into the 17th century, and it's usually the 17th century that's associated with Baroque. And his name is Federico Baroccio. He was from Urbino. He actually, I think, spent most of his life in Urbino, which is where Raphael is from. And here we have his deposition from the cross. Now, we've seen a number of depositions by now. And suddenly what you see in this deposition is something fresh. There's a feeling for space, there's a feeling for atmosphere, color. Well, it's not Venice, but nevertheless, of course, Titian is working in Venice, so the Venetian color is affecting everyone. The feeling for light, the idea of this activity that takes place in a painting, the figure-like activity. There's really nothing ornamental about it. It's quite sincere. It's quite powerful, convincing, emotional. Look at this. Do you remember our Rosso Fiorentino? That is his deposition. Excuse me. And there's no background. Everything is enacted against this plain blue background. We do not know what the atmosphere is like. The figures are extremely jagged. They're very attractive to our eyes because we're so used to modern art, and it looks more modern art to us than this, for instance. Everything is treated separately. There is no real connection. It is affected. It's compelling. There's no question about it. But it was felt at the time that that was just a period, and it needs to be superseded with something that was felt considerably deeper. And so when you compare these two, all the figures, you can see how they're all together. The women are together here. Christ, he's almost sort of flying of this cross, while in the background the atmosphere is spectacular. The storm, remember when he was crucified, the storm came on, and Baroque chose to have this storm still there, extremely strong wind. It's almost as if a hurricane is coming, and with hurricane comes different weather. And so this is what's going to be very much in the Baroque mode. Great deal of motion, great deal of spectacle too, no question about it, but the desire to unify the figures in their activity. In fact, very often the activity itself will unify the figures, as opposed to here where each figure sort of represented separately. I mean, there's Mary Magdalene, and she attempts clearly to hug the Virgin's knees, but there's no emotional connection. Here's another Mary that's looking the other way. So everyone is separate, whereas here everyone is together. Again, he's from Urbino, Raphael, and Raphael very much liked to paint in sort of a figure eight composition. In other words, there'd be a circle at the top and a circle at the bottom. And you kind of see this here too. There's our circle right there that that consists of the female protagonist, and there's another circle right here that consists of the male protagonist. There's also a very powerful diagonal right here that is created by the ladder and then Christ's arm. And a diagonal will be something else also that will characterize Baroque greatly. So, a new wind, a new direction. Now, however, the greatest genius, perhaps, of 16th century Italian painting was one Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. His name was Michelangelo Merisi. He was from the village of Caravaggio. He was not named after Michelangelo. He was named after Archangel Michael. His life was rather extraordinary. He will not live long. He will die quite young. Is here. Yes, about 39 years. But in that short lifespan, he not only managed to fulfill his genius as a painter, but he also established a record of lawlessness really unequaled in the history of art, and perhaps only surpassed in the history of brigandage. I mean, the one artist who comes somewhat close to him is Cellini. This is our sculptor Cellini, who did the salt and pepper statuette that we saw in gold. But otherwise, Caravaggio took the cake. It's just he was born with a very violent temper, and we don't know exactly when he came to Rome as a young man. Well, I mean, he died at 39, so everything was as a young man. But he would get into bar fights, and he would impose himself on young men and women, and he constantly was in one scrape or another, even though at the same time he painted and acquired very powerful protectors among the cardinals, no less, and aristocracy. But it's just, he couldn't be helped. And then finally at a ball game, which was sort of like our tennis, he killed a man. And that seemed to be just too much, and so he was to be imprisoned, and he escaped Rome then. And he escaped Rome, and then he went to Naples, he went to Sicily, he went to Malta. In Malta for a short time he was even made the Knight of the Order of St. John, the Maltese Order of St. John, but then another quarrel ensued and he was imprisoned again. His knighthood was revoked. He escaped to Naples. Then in Naples, clearly some of his enemies caught up with him and wounded him quite badly. Then by this time, it appears that the cardinals back in Rome managed to acquire a pardon for him from the Holy See, and there he was on a ship, and on that ship he was this time mistakenly arrested, which was just absurd. He was mistakenly arrested. He was he was kicked off the ship near Porto d'Ercole, and without any of his possessions. And then as he walked toward the nearest town, he caught malaria and he died. And that was the end of the life of Caravaggio. A very violent life and uneasy life. But he painted all the while, and what's just amazing is that for such a violent temper, for a man with such a violent temper, to be able to draw with such extraordinary discipline, that was just astonishing. Here he is. So remember, born in 71, 93, he's 22 years old, and in his early 20s, he paints a number of these Bacchuses. There are quite many of them. They seem to be self-portraits, in fact, and what's quite astonishing about them is that they have no background. It's just all darkness. And this is how Caravaggio's exploration into the so-called tenebrism, tenebra, shadow, darkness, began. Everything is subdued. Everything is dark, and there's just one direct light that falls on his own person to show him to us. He is Bacchus, so he portrays himself as the god of wine and revelry and all the good things in life. He places himself at the table, and it almost seems, because we don't know where he is, we're not given any context. It's just him. So as a result, the directness of his presence and directness of his communication with us is very immediate. It's almost as if we're sitting on the other side of the table in conversation. And it's also the lovely thing here is we're having conversation, each one has their own thoughts. Perhaps here Caravaggio was looking directly in front of him, had his own thoughts, then we said something, at which point he turns around with this sort of almost melancholic, wistful smile, and smiles at us in order to answer whatever thoughts we had, because as you see, he is sitting with his body is in profile, and only when he turns his face becomes frontal. He holds grapes that he loved to portray, and it's almost an in vino veritas. He seems to have believed then that truth is indeed in wine. He also loved portraying knots, almost sort of like Donatello back in the 15th century. Conveyed Donatello was a sculptor in the 15th century, and he had this tension about his sculptures, and a number of times he indeed portrayed these knots, and this is the Caravaggio's way of doing it. It's almost as if the knot can be undone in one quick gesture. And as we see, his right shoulder is already undressed. So another Bacchus figure here. Here's another one. And here not only he wistfully sort of looks around at us, but here He is surrounded with, I mean, he is crowned with what seems to be autumn leaves, and he is extending a glass of wine to us, so we are about to chin-chin. But what's also fascinating here, he has the same kind of a tunic on him, and as you see, and a bow, a knot that one finger is actually inside the bow as if it's about to be undone. And in front of him sits a still life, a very, very beautiful still life. But when you have your PowerPoint and look at it closer, you will see that many leaves are dry, and then some fruit is rotten. And what this will come to mean is, in the 17th century, in fact, particularly in the north, in the Netherlands, the artists will love to paint what's called the vanity portraits, or the vanity images. And that is a vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity. The most delicious fruit must rot. The most beautiful face must age. Life will disappear. He invokes that same melancholy that we saw in the other portrait now through this vanity's impression. But again, the entire composition is sunk in darkness. And yes?
No, I was just going to add, what else is interesting about that is that instead of killing the mood,
right,
that actually just heightened the mood, because, I mean, we're living through a pandemic right now, of course, but the concept of orgy during plague was a very real thing.
Right.
That fact is that, I mean, yes, we all live with death, we all live with grief, we all live with the knowledge that we will die, but it was much more immediate in Renaissance Europe. You would see the dead and dying on the street in ways that you tend not to in 21st century America. And it's
a 50-year-old man was an old man.
A 50-year-old, and this idea that that death was, you know, nipping at your heels made you party so much harder. I mean,
it's true.
It's the same.
It's certainly the case with him.
Right. I mean, it's like with ancient Romans, they very often had mosaics of skeletons in their dining rooms.
So will the Renaissance.
Because
they'll have it too.
And the skeletons would be holding wine glasses. It just the idea that
having a good time.
Right, because you're on a timer, so really pack in as much life as you can. Right.
That's a very good point. Yes, feast during plague. Very much so. And still another one. In fact, here he shows again that same basket of fruit. And again, vanity of vanities, you see those yellow leaves right there and rotten fruit. Darkness behind him, but slightly illuminated, quite theatrical, as if to show his face all the better. He seems to have been bisexual, and here he certainly wants to show the beauty of his face. The lips are slightly open. It's a very sensual portrait, without question. And it's almost as if he's offering this tremendous treasure of himself to us, even though he obviously realizes that this treasure must come to naught, just as all of us will come to naught. But in the meantime, just as Sasha said, let's have a lovely time. Here, it almost as if he paints a group of people, but almost as if it seems that it's his face repeated many times. There again is the knot, and here's the tunic with the left shoulder this time undressed, and it almost appears as if all we need to do is just pull the bow and it will be undone. The composition is extremely concise. It also is very crowded. I mean, 4 people could not fit into space like this, but there's no background again. It's almost as if he portrays himself in his various personalities, and he loves music, he loves singing. I mean, these are all the same faces. Here again is our bunch of grapes, of course, and it seems that the basket may be painted there in the corner. The tenebrism, the chiaroscuro, light and dark, he indeed very much embraces that and makes it dramatic. And soon enough, oh, and here actually he does just the basket of fruit by itself, the same basket as we had seen here and there and not here. Okay. And here's the basket of by itself. This time, instead of making the background dark, he makes it completely off-white, beige, so to speak. Again, we don't really know, it doesn't even appear to be sitting on a table, even though obviously it must. But here we very much see the dry leaves and the rot that appears on the apples, on the rest of the fruit. And it's just called the basket of fruit, but it can also be interpreted as vanity or vanities. He's about 26 now, and he faces remarkable shield with the head of Medusa. Now Medusa was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters. She was supposed to be, when she was born, she was supposed to be a beautiful maiden, and she was violated by Poseidon in the temple of Athena by god of the sea. And well, who got punished? Medusa, of course. Then Athena turned her face into something ugly and her hair into hissing snakes. Yes?
An alternative version of that myth is that rather that Athena couldn't punish Poseidon because he was a fellow god. So instead she gave Medusa a gift. She took away the beauty that had attracted Poseidon to her so that she would never again become a target, and she gave her power to destroy men by turning them to stone, and that's why
anybody but women too also.
Yes.
Anyone who would look at her face
but who
would
went
turn
up
to
the
stone.
hill to go attack her? It was always heroes.
Right.
So in many cases the head of Medusa would be placed over women's shelters as a protectress.
Interesting.
Because she became the symbol of resilience against men.
But men also used, because what will happen that
Yes, exactly.
that Perseus, the hero Perseus here, speaking of our Cellini, Cellini was run up to Caravaggio in terms of brigandage, in terms of illegal behavior. But Cellini, and that's the same Loggia di Lanzi that we saw, where we saw the abduction of the Sabine women, and this is Benvenuto Cellini now, and this is bronze. And once he decapitated Medusa, he did it without looking at her, and then he would use her because her head continued to turn people into stone. So he used her in his adventures until he later gave her to Athena, and then Athena placed the head on her shield, which is what you see here. The head of the Medusa now became sort of a weapon against the evil eye and the weapon against danger. Yeah. So, but the way he's painting her, he's painting her in the moment of horror. Has she felt that Perseus is behind her and about to decapitate her? Because the head still conveys the horror of death, even though the blood is already streaming from it. And just as with the Cellini Perseus, right here is the head, and the blood is dripping from the head and from the body as well. Right here, she's lying under his feet. So really an extraordinary, very compelling painting, and one, of course, that caught public attention. But soon enough, he will actually become a painter of biblical scenes, and both the Old and the New Testament. Um, he would transform the scene by his extraordinary theatrical light, and what he will do, he will go back to nature. He will completely reject the idea of the mannerisms, that one doesn't need to paint from nature anymore, one can just paint from Raphael, from Michelangelo, from what have you. Caravaggio, not only he didn't do preparatory sketches, he painted right into the canvas, sort of as Impressionists will do in the 19th century. But he also used as models his companions. He used people from the street, which often got him in trouble as well. And he brought into painting this immediate realism, sort of as we already began to see with his Bacchus figures, that hit us right below the belt, that we feel the extreme action. We feel the blood. We feel the anger, the pain. In this case, Judith is a Jewish maiden who seduced Holofernes, who was a giant who fought on the side of the Philistines, and the Jews and the Philistines never came to terms. So she seduced Holofernes, and while he was asleep, she decapitated him. And that's what Caravaggio shows here. Now, first of all, the composition, the diagonals. The diagonals appear immediately. So you'll see these diagonals going through Baroque painting everywhere. So here's our diagonal, and on the same line is the face of Judith and Holofernes, right there. A theatrical curtain as if drawn apart, but we already saw it in mannerism, to show the real scene. Everything is submerged in darkness with extremely bright lights shining on our protagonist. Judith is doing the deed. You can see a huge sword. She almost appears to do it effortlessly. And then the blood from Holofernes pours at an angle to the sword. And his face, in fact, is not unlike the face of Medusa. The mouth also is open. She too is decapitated. He clearly had a fascination with human execution. The colors are spectacular. Again, tenebrism, chiaroscuro, lights and dark. We go from deep reds and blacks to bright white of Judith's shirt, and then next to her stands the servant, her servant with a bag, ready to put that head in the bag, and she is. Where is she looking at? Well, she's looking, of course, at the scene. But Judith, she almost looks not so much as if she's horrified, but as sort of squirmy. And yes, and does it effortlessly at the length of her arms. You'd think that the arms would be bent, the body would be bent. She's completely straight, and but compositionally just brilliant. Now, we're going into a church in Rome now, and it's called San Luigi Francese, and who is Louis of France. And this was a French church in Rome, and for that church, well, here's the, in that church there is the Contarelli Chapel. And in this chapel, Caravaggio painted two canvases. Here. The first canvas he painted for it was Saint Matthew and the Angel. Now what we need to remember is that these early apostles were fishermen, laborers. They didn't know how to read, they didn't know how to write, they were people of the people, so to speak. And that's how Caravaggio wanted to paint them. He did not want to paint them as princes of the church or celestial beings. They were people of the people. And so he gets one of his companions, an older man, and he sits him down, and he doesn't know what he's doing, essentially. So the angel, because the four evangelists, and that's Saint Mark, Saint Matthew, Saint Luke, and Saint John. All the four evangelists have their personifications. So Saint Matthew is personified by an angel, Saint Luke by a winged bull, Saint Mark by a winged lion, and Saint John by an eagle, a winged, obviously. So here's Saint Matthew with his angel, and what the angel essentially is doing, he is actually reaching out patiently, trying to show him what to do. You've got to write your scripture. You've got to know how to do it. Let me guide your hand. And that's what the angel is doing right here. He's guiding the hand of Saint Matthew. Saint Matthew, he's unshod, his feet are dirty, kind of sticking into our faces. His face is incomprehending. He's completely puzzled. He doesn't understand what it is that he's doing. Well, guess what? This painting was rejected. The patrons did not want it. They just felt that it was very irreligious in a certain way. And interestingly enough, Caravaggio clearly very much sympathized with a common man, but this very common man did not sympathize with him, because common people, when they went to church, they wanted to see glory, they wanted to see beauty, they wanted to see heaven, golden heaven, with princely creatures sitting in heaven. They didn't want to see themselves. That just didn't work for them. In fact, Caravaggio's patrons, the people who did like Caravaggio's art, were the Conicenzi, the aristocrats of the lay and religious and the spiritual aristocrats, who, for him, that was a tremendous novelty. It was something that no one had ever done before. It was something that was fresh, something that was very, very interesting, and it were the aristocrats with aristocratic taste who, in fact, very much appreciated Caravaggio's painting. But this clearly was too much even for them. So they rejected this painting. He will paint another painting. Unfortunately, this painting will be destroyed at the end of the war in 1945. Which is, yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, the interesting part with Caravaggio, as much as he claimed to be a rebel, and that's the one thing that Caravaggio was throughout. He was a rebel in life, he was a rebel in art. But as much as he claimed that his art was unlike anything before, which is true, and yet to a great degree, he was definitely steeped in accomplishments of the Renaissance. So here, for instance, the whole idea, in fact, of teaching, except of course Caravaggio reversed it, but the idea of education began in the 15th century, 14th century, 15th century. I mean, it actually even began in the Middle Ages, at the height of the Middle Ages, but now we're talking about the Renaissance. A man who was a near contemporary of Caravaggio, Guido Reni, and who was very influenced by him, in fact. Here is his portrayal also of Saint Matthew, but here it's more like a grandfather and a grandchild. Right here, he is writing himself, and there's this understanding between them, and a wise understanding, a delightful understanding, sort of a family understanding. There's really closeness, and this in fact goes back even further. Here the two of them. But while Caravaggio definitely portrays his Matthew as Well, intellectually deficient. Guido Reni doesn't do that. Guido Reni gives him this very intelligent face that even if the man has not been learned, he was given wonderful intelligence at birth, and with that intelligence there is a perfect understanding.
And
between
great
the two.
hair.
And great hair.
Oh my God.
I know. Where's this one, of course?
What a majestic
Not so
silver
much.
fox.
I know.
Oh no.
I know.
Oh,
I know. The idea goes back, as I said, here, we are in the 15th century, at the end of the 15th century, and there was this remarkable painter in Florence by the name of Ghirlandaio, who was, he was in fact very successful and executed many commissions. He was also a brilliant fresco painter. The couple of years that Michelangelo in fact learned fresco painting while he was young in Florence was in Ghirlandaio's workshop. And here is one of most beloved by me, certainly, painting of, again, a grandfather and his grandson. And they are, this is a very, very typical 15th century portrait with the window cut through the dark wall as if the window into lightness, sort of Plato's caves. So the darkness is the caves, and then he comes out of the cave, and there's this extraordinary, wonderful, magical world of knowledge and intellect and creation, and so much of it we don't know, and so much of it we do want to know. So that's light among darkness, and here is the man and the understanding between him and his young grandchild. Now, education, classical education, was extremely important. It was very much felt that a man cannot possibly be the best of himself, become the best of himself, if he didn't know the best of other men. And so thus education became important. And here we have Guido Reni, who clearly, obviously, he knew the Ghirlandaio painting. There's Guido Reni and there's Ghirlandaio, and a considerable difference, 130 years difference between the paintings, but the idea is very much the same. And as I said, Guido Reni was influenced, well, everybody will be influenced by Caravaggio. There will be very few painters who will not be influenced by Caravaggio. Those are the two Michelangelos. The first Michelangelo that influenced everybody, and then the second Michelangelo, Caravaggio in this case, will influence everybody after him as well. And here we are back to our painting that was destroyed, and pretty much from the year 1600 till the year 1610, which is why all his religious paintings are given in approximately a 1610 date, because we're uncertain exactly when he painted them, belong to the last years of his life. But as I said, this one unfortunately is destroyed. Instead of this painting, he painted another Saint Matthew. And this one was more to the taste of his patrons, the obligatory flying of the drapery and the swirling of the drapery, the obligatory flying of the angel. But Caravaggio still remained very, very much faithful to himself. And yes, Saint Matthew is writing himself. He's sort of looking almost frightened at the angel, while the angel is still kind of explaining everything to him on his fingers. But he still conveyed the awkwardness of Saint Matthew. Well, look at that bench that he is kneeling on. That bench is just about to turn over, right here. So there's this moment in time. There's a diagonal here. There's almost sort of a triangle, and then the bench that Saint Matthew is leaning on is about to tumble over. The light here, again, TENEBRISM, And it seems that the light, well, there is a bit of a cast shadow, and that's the only way that we may know where the source of light is. And it comes somewhere from the left, falls on the angel. Again, this very dramatic juxtaposition of the very dark shadows and very light linen of the angel, and the angel in this case has dark wings, not white wings. So it's and the composition and the conversation between them is also quite delightful, because while Saint Matthew turns one way, the angel turns the other way, and they sort of meet in the middle. Here it is. There's his angel with the white feathers, the angel with the dark feathers, and this is the difference between the two paintings. And as I said, the patrons accepted the second one, but not the first. And this is the Cantarelli Chapel, as I said, in Luigi de Francese, the church in Rome, the French church in Rome. So we looked at this Saint Matthew. I think Signor Cantarelli, his first name was Matthew, and so Matthew was his patron saint, and that's why he asked Caravaggio to record the life of Saint Matthew. One of the most famous or most well-known paintings of Caravaggio is this one. It's called The Calling of Saint Matthew, and here it is. So two paintings of Caravaggio's are really, really pretty much very well known, and that is The Calling of Saint Matthew #1, Medusa #2. But then, of course, all other paintings as well. I mean, everything he did was tremendous. So as you see, through all these paintings, a rebel that he is, and possessing of the most violent temper, nevertheless, his brush is so controlled. And he, as I said, he didn't have time for preparatory sketches. He was too busy fighting with people and quarreling with people. So he painted directly onto canvas. The Calling of Saint Matthew. Saint Matthew, in fact, was not only he was not a laborer. He was a tax collector back then. Well, today also we don't like tax collectors. We don't like IRS. But back then, a tax collector who actually came knocking on one's door was despised beyond tolerance. The lowest of the lowest. At the same time, they obviously cheated. They were also liars and cheaters and thieves, and they were despised for that as well. But because they lied and cheated and stole, they could afford better clothes than others, and as such showed them off. And so they were vulgarians as well, in addition to all the other charms they possessed. So there sits Matthew himself, right there. He sits again, sort of like Caravaggio himself. It's a lowly hole in the wall. It's a tavern. It's a cheap tavern where he sits with his comrades who are dressed in these gaudy clothes. He actually is dressed in rather somber clothes. But everybody around him, and in fact, this boy actually looks like Caravaggio himself. They're counting money, which also, back then, one did not count money in public. It was considered a very crude and vulgar thing to do. So one did not count money. Nevertheless, here they are, and what do you think they're doing? They're counting money in a public place. So right there, everybody who looked at this painting at the time knew that these are vulgarians sitting around the table, crude, greedy, and dishonest. But suddenly the door opens up right there. Here opens the door, and in comes, in fact, Saint Peter, because Saint Peter, remember, he was a fisherman and he was one of the first apostles. In comes Saint Peter. We see Saint Peter, and Saint Peter is usually portrayed in a yellow cape, and that's what you see. You see yellow, so usually you know Saint Peter either by his yellow cape or by his keys. One key to heaven, gold key to heaven, silver key to earth. and to the kingdom of heaven and to the kingdom of earth, of the earth. But then behind him there's another figure, and this figure in fact is Jesus Christ. And Michelangelo, now remembering that his first name is Michelangelo, quotes right here in this gesture, he quotes the Michelangelo's ceiling, the creation of Adam, right here.
That's very cool.
I know, right? Interesting. And there's Christ. There's just a hint of a halo. But Peter doesn't have one, no, of course, not Matthew. And now the light does not come through the window because the windows are just sort of covered with oiled paper, dirted and sullied. And but the light comes with Christ. We don't exactly know from where. Jesus is the light. And as Jesus extends his arm and points with his hand, Matthew sort of points at himself with two fingers. Is this me? What are you talking about? And at some point when you look at the actual picture, it almost looks as if his index finger points on his neighbor. So he uses two fingers. The thumb points on himself, and the index finger points on the other fellow, because I mean he's uncertain. You want me? You want the next guy? Whom do you want? These two people at the back, they're so engaged in their accounts, in counting the money, they don't even pay attention to what's going on. But the boy who sort of looks like Caravaggio, and another one with a sword, looks around. And this really became one of the icons of Baroque art. The composition is there. There is a diagonal, of course, but then the composition is divided by the window. There's a circle of Caravaggio's companions, essentially, and then these two figures that point and Matthew, and that is the calling of Saint Matthew. That means that I go among the poorest. So, in a way, Caravaggio almost associates himself with Jesus Christ, as irreligious as it might sound, because Caravaggio looks for his figures and for his models among the lowest of the low. And that's what Jesus Christ did. He went looking for his apostles among the lowest of the low, and the poor, and the desire to transform the world, which Christianity will then attempt to do. So there's a very interesting parallel right there, in addition, of course, to this extraordinary drama of the calling of Saint Matthew.